You're in your trailer with your tech bros, munching Taco Bell, fiddling with some lenses. What was the aha moment? It was like, you know what? I think we can solve the challenge that has been troubling the VR industry that was trying and that you figured out. How did that happen?
There were kind of two things that happened. And one of them I know we've talked about before, and I think it's a valuable mentality for people to think about in whatever career they're pursuing or whatever non-career they're pursuing. For years, I had been thinking about what the next step in display technology was, in gaming technology, and data visualization. And so a time came where I had this pretty crazy home computer set up with 6 monitors, all rigged into a dual graphics card AMD Eyefinity rig. And I started to ask myself, okay, so like what's next? I've got this crazy multi-monitor setup. Is it more graphics cards? Is it more displays? And I realized, wait a sec, this is the wrong question entirely. I shouldn't be asking what the next step is, because the next step isn't going to be that interesting, and it's just another tiny little incremental bump. What I should be asking is what the last step is. So let's think about it. What's the last step? Well, obviously, it was apparent to me that it was going to be virtual reality, the ability to actually feel like you are inside of a totally simulated environment, to feel like you're inside of a game rather than just observing it on a screen, no matter how large, no matter how many, how realistic it might seem, no matter how many displays you were stitching together with your Eyefinity rig. And that was a really, really big moment for me, because that changed my thinking, where I said, okay, I'm not going to work on the thing that's here and now. I'm going to work on where I think it's actually going. I'm going to try to skate to the puck instead of going after where it is now. There's a million sports analogies that the sports fans have known for years about this, but it's not common in the tech space. Anyway, so I started doing research, not about what the next step in VR would be, but what you would need to do to solve some of these fundamental problems that had plagued the industry up to that point. Things like the headsets being very heavy, the headsets having very low field of view, having lots of latency, delay between your motion your head makes and when that's reflected on your retina. And I came up with a series of technical innovations that reduced latency, increased field of view, reduced weight, and hugely reduced the cost. I was handily outperforming $30,000, $40,000 military grade headsets that are used for dismounted infantry training with a device that costs less than $300 to sell. And that's because I had I can get into the clever ideas if you want, but probably the number one philosophy was only solve in hardware what must be solved in hardware. Everything else solve for free in software. So for example, does it make any sense to make a VR headset the traditional way, where you make a wide field of view optic with many, many, many glass stages in it to achieve a wide field of view, low chromatic aberration, and low geometric distortion? Instead, you say, okay, field of view, that I have to do in hardware, but I'm just going to optimize a design that has tons of chromatic aberration, tons of geometric distortion, a totally unacceptable amount, and then I'm going to run a real-time shader on my graphics card to pre-distort my rendered image as the inverse function of that distortion, basically pre-distorting it so that when it goes through the second layer of distortion in the lens, it then comes back to looking correct.
That's the way I would have done it, right? It seems pretty obvious, right?
I got to admit, that was one of my best ideas.
Yeah, it sounds like, and obviously someone liked it.
We kept applying it across the board, and what it ended up with was a headset that, yes, it needed probably an extra 10 or 15% more render horsepower, but I saw that computer hardware was advancing so rapidly that 15% drain on your compute power doing all this software correction, that you just wait 2 or 3 months and you're already there. The hardware, that never changes. It's always expensive. It's always heavy. It's always limited. And so that was really the key insight that made Oculus what it was.
And that, of course, served you well later, as we'll get into with Anduril. But you had this, you solved this, you figured out how to demonstrate it, you got people interested in buying it. And so Facebook, ultimately Meta, was the winner. Were there others that were vying to buy this from you?
There were a lot of companies that were interested in Oculus because we were years ahead of the competition. And it wasn't just a matter of our technology. We had really great tech, but we also had hundreds of video game developers that were developing content for our platform. We had a really great SDK that made it easy for anybody to make a virtual reality game, something that had never been done before. And it was integrated into all the major game engines, to the point where all the universities were, anyone doing VR, they were doing it on Oculus. And we had also sold hundreds of thousands of development kits to game developers, studios around the world. It was something that Facebook was interested in, but a lot of other companies were interested in. I won't put their names out there, but I'll say it's everybody you'd think. But the difference between Facebook, now Meta, and the other companies was that the other companies were looking at this. They were looking at this as kind of a short-term win. All of these companies have a 10 or 15-year roadmap. Virtual reality was not on any of their roadmaps as the thing that is going to dominate their business. And Facebook had a different pitch. It was, look, if you go to hypothetically, likely, if you were to get purchased by Microsoft or Google, you're going to be working in service of their existing 15-year roadmap, one that is primarily focused on web, mobile, and maintaining their current kind of duopoly dominance in the tech industry. They don't actually want to shake things up and cause a AR, VR revolution to happen, because they might do okay, but they're not likely to be right at the very pinnacle like they are right now. Facebook, on the other hand, didn't have a hardware platform. They didn't have an operating system they controlled. They were in a position where shaking up the box of dice was actually likely to cause good things to happen for them. Put another way, let's say that Facebook didn't end up, let's say the VR revolution happens. Everyone's using VR all the time. Everyone's wearing augmented reality glasses. If Facebook could cause that to happen, they might not be the top tech company in the world, or even the second top company in the world, but they're going to be in a much better position than their position at the time, which is controlling none of the hardware, none of the software, totally serving at the whims of the people who did control those things. And so their bet was, if we can make this revolution happen, we're going to be better positioned, which means, therefore, that they're highly incentivized to actually make it happen. Put it in a conspiracy way, does Microsoft really want us to shift from desktop computing to immersive computing? Is that actually good for their established many billion-dollar business? Hard to say. It's hard to say.
So Microsoft was interested. I think we just got that. So let me ask you this.
It's worth noting, it's not even that out of the blue, in that, like, we were closely partnered with Microsoft at the time. You could stream Xbox games to your Oculus at launch. We did a bunch of content partnerships as well. So it's not like, one day they knock on our door and say, hey, we're this company called Microsoft and we'd like to talk about what you're doing. People understood what we were doing.
So Facebook shakes things up. They win the lottery. They get you. Is it fair to say that you thought this was the last step? You thought you were going to do VR, kind of that was your career?
Oh, I've said many times I would still be doing VR if I wouldn't have been knocked out the door a few years after getting
so you get knocked out the door. This pops up on Facebook yesterday, wearing some goggles that maybe somebody invented up there at Meta. People are wondering, is there a story behind this?
Look, all the people who orchestrated my ouster they're not at Meta anymore. It's one of those things where I'm still extremely bitter about it. But
hadn't noticed.
But no, oh man, no, you've noticed. Anyone who's ever talked to me even once has noticed. Yes. But you have to recognize at some point, Meta's a very different company. We're talking about something that happened 8 years ago. They've changed a lot of their own policies. They've changed they've changed a lot of the composition of the workforce. At some point, you have to deal with things as they are, not as they were.
Amen. So you're out of the door at Facebook, and now you've done well enough. And Google it if you want to know how well he did. But you've done well enough to not only could you move to an island, you could buy an island and just kind of do nothing for the rest of your life. But you decided, you know what? I'm not content. What are some of the things that you considered prior to deciding to go into defense tech? What were the things that were on your mind as possibilities?
Well, I got to say, first of all, that the common thing about people who dream about making it big and then doing, the island retirement thing and never doing anything again, very, very rare for those people to get the island. It's one of those like horrible twists of fate. The mentality that you need to get that amount of money and to grind through what it takes to build a business that'll get you there doesn't allow you to stop working, and it doesn't allow you to relax. I don't know anybody outside. People will point to like Hollywood because it's highly visible. You got to remember, like you got to look at those people sort of like lottery winners. I'm not saying that they're not talented, but it's very different from the reality of 99% of people who manage to make enough money to buy an island. I think we're all cursed. The crew, the Black Pearl and Pirates of the Caribbean, like we're cursed to walk this planet for eternity, ever in search of more gold. It's just the way that I see it. Yeah. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
What were things you considered? What were the areas?
Right. Well, I didn't even consider retiring because for two reasons. One, a lot of people who start a unicorn, a company worth over $1 billion, and then leave. They leave because they want to spend more time with their families for a little bit, or they get bored. Very quickly, they get more bored in retirement. They start something new. I was cut down in my prime. I was running a major VR division at a major company, doing exactly what I loved, and then I was tossed out the door. And so I wanted to do something that mattered for a few reasons. One, because I didn't want to spend my time on something meaningless. Two, because I was really out to prove that I was somebody, that I was not a one-hit wonder, and that all the people who thought that I were going to look like idiots. And that last one was really important to me. And so there are a few things that I was looking at. I was looking at trying to start a chain of nonprofit private prisons that would compete with existing private prisons using a totally different business model, basically offering to house prisoners for free and then only getting paid after they were released and stayed out of prison for 5 5 years. The idea being that I could win a bunch of contracts and get rid of a lot of the incentives to have people just returning over and over again, which is what the private prison companies want. They don't actually want real criminals. They want people who know how the system works, who will just sit quietly in the cell and go through their time and get their bed paid for, which is not what I think incarceration should be for.
So kicked around some various ideas.
Yeah, I wanted to start, I also looked at solving obesity with petroleum-derived synthetic food products.
Left-handed sugar we talked about last time.
Left-handed sugar was a big part of that.
Left-handed sugar. I'd never heard of it.
If anyone can execute on large-scale manufacturing of left-handed sugars, whether it's dextrose, sucrose, fructose, any of them, you're going to be worth hundreds of billions of dollars. It is an extraordinary opening for someone in biotech to figure out. Now, the problem is you're going to have to build the first biological organism on the entire planet to consume left-handed sugar structures. Nothing's ever done it on the planet. There's no reason it couldn't. It's just that we don't have any biological examples to pull from. Anyway, look, you can effectively make something that is the molecular twin, the mirror copy of sugar, where mechanically it is sugar, and it crusts like sugar, and it cooks like sugar, and it bakes like sugar, and it even binds to your taste receptors like sugar. It is, for all intents and purposes, sugar, except you cannot metabolize it. Nothing can metabolize it. But that also means nothing can make it. And so all the synthesis is very, very expensive and purely artificial right now. If you could make sugar cane that was left-handed, you'd be worth a lot of money. It'd be a total game changer. 0 calorie, 0 health impact, sugar, frosting, soda, all of it.
There we go. Well, it sounds good to me. Sign me up. I'll be the first consumer for anybody who figures that out.
Someone's going to figure it out within our lifespan. The technologies are coming together on that. And then, finally, what I decided to do was work on national security. That was what I thought was, on the balance, the best use of my talent.
So now you decided national security, and you're coming up with a company, kind of defense tech, and you're looking for a name. And so I'm going to read a passage that may give a little bit of insight to how this came about. This is a box set of J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, page 277. The background is we've had a sword that was destroyed when it killed the bad guy. The bad guy's back. The sword's being reforged, and here we go. Very bright was that sword when it was made whole again. The light of the sun shone redly on it, and the light of the moon shone cold, and its edge was hard and keen. And Aragorn gave it a new name, and he called it Anduril, Flame of the West. So I assume that's how the name came about. Tell us a little bit more. Why that name?
Well, there's a whole bunch of angles to this. I mean, Anduril is reforged from the shards of Narsil, the sword that was broken. And I think that a lot of what we're trying to do was not just build a new company, but rebuild what we used to have in this country in terms of a national security capability that took our best and brightest and put them to work on some of the most important national security challenges. The reason I started Anduril is because I perceived that we were running a very dangerous experiment in this country. We were, for the first time, completely divorcing our most innovative technology companies from the Department of Defense. That's never happened in history. And that was because there were cultural reasons, ideological reasons, but mostly it came down to money and a desire to cater to the Chinese market. And you can imagine how the Cold War would have gone if our most innovative tech companies had hedged their bets because they thought that Soviet Russia was going to be a really big part of their revenue profile. You can imagine how World War II would have gone if our most innovative technology companies had said, we don't really want to get involved with national security. I think Imperial Japan is going to be a massive revenue opportunity for our investors in the next 2 quarters. But this is how it was going with China. And so I wanted to be clear, we're not just starting a company. We're trying to return to that tradition. We're taking the sword that was broken, this thing that used to work in this company or in this country, and we're going to do it here. The other reason that I think it really spoke to me and a lot of the other co-founders, we're all nerdy dudes. We all love Lord of the Rings, but also this idea of the Flame of the West, this sword that is inherently good, that fights for good, is wielded only by the kingdom of man against the hordes of Mordor. That was, and specifically a sword that is inherently created and wielded to fight evil. Specifically, I wanted to be clear: we're not just a neutral company. We're not here to say, we're just here to make money. We're just here to make something for everyone. We are taking sides. We are going to fight for the things that our country values, that our allies around the world have in common. Ignore the things that maybe we don't. But for the most part, there's enough commonality between Western allies in the United States that we can agree, we're going to be building things for good, for the kingdom of man, to fight against the hordes of Mordor. There's actually one other bit, which was a quote from the book. Someone said they love the blade not for the brightness of the blade or the keenness of the edge, only for that which it protects. And I think that there's a lesson there, an aspirational lesson. Kind of like it's one of those ones where it's true, but you're told to turn the other cheek, but actually you don't. That's kind of how I see it. It's an aspirational idea that when you're building a defense company, you're not building weapons because because the weapons are cool, because the blade is bright, or for the keenness of the edge. You're doing it really for that which it protects. Right. And I remind my employees of that all the time. We're not just trying to build cool stuff. The stuff is cool, but we're doing it for a greater purpose. And we need to always remember that. Now, at the same time, the reality is that the blades are bright and the edges are keen. And that's how you get people to want to work on stuff. You can't get people to work on things if you run your office like a funeral home every day. Right. And so when people are like, oh, but isn't it terrible to celebrate the power of weapons? And I say, you know what? Societies have always needed a warrior class that is enthused and excited about enacting violence on others in pursuit of good aims. And I think that it's reasonable for the philosophers to degrade those people and whine about how they're sick in the head, but society needs them. Yeah. And even if I'm sick in the head, we need people who are willing to fight for our country. And I'm not doing that directly. My life's not on the line, but you need people like me who are sick in that way and who don't lose any sleep making tools of violence.
In order to preserve freedom.
That's right. I think that there's a lot of people who cannot handle that, and I think that's totally fine. I have no beef with people who say, oh, I could never do that. I'd be so guilty every night knowing that even bad people are facing the ultimate punishment for their crimes. I say, well, it's a good thing that we've got a mix in society. Specialization of labor is what built America. Right. We don't all need to do the same things. We don't need to all think the same way. And the pacifists exist on the sacrifices of the people who actually put their lives on the line. And I think that we should respect that, even if we're not willing to do it ourselves.
Yeah, one of the things that you said in a prior interview struck me that war only happens when there's a disagreement as to what the outcome would be.
That's right.
So unpack that more, and I think that's an important point to make.
With rare exception, and I'll say the modern times have seen some of the greatest exceptions to this. So typically, warfare between nation states only starts when one or both sides misunderstand who is going to win the conflict. If both sides understand who's going to win, it's very rare for things to proceed to violence, because the weaker nation, knowing full well that they're going to lose, typically says, okay, I'm going to capitulate. I'm going to give you what you want. And that's why, by the way, it's important to have peace through strength. But ignoring that whole side of it, it's typically when both sides think that they are going to be able to come out on top that a war starts. That is the most dangerous situation. And that's why it's so important to not be evenly matched with your enemy. Evenly matching your enemy is what leads to the most dangerous form of conflict. It would be better for us to be completely at our enemy's mercy, or to be vastly stronger to them in an overwhelming way where they are fully aware that they cannot win. Now, where this falls apart is where you have enemies who have irrational aims. They're like you have jihadists who know full well they are going to die. Everyone that they're fighting with is going to die, but they think that on the other side, it's all going to be worth it. And it's very, very hard to engage in game theory with people who pursue the non-game theory optimal strategy.
But it is possible to diminish the effect.
It's like playing Monopoly with the person who's going to drop out and give all their money to somebody else. Like that's what it's like to fight some of these irrational actors. I think this, especially you've seen in the Middle East over the last few decades. And they're not going to win. They're just going to screw it up for everybody else.
Right. So you're creating these systems, and let's go a little bit deeper into what you've created. This lattice system that allows for an AI, and by the way, Anduril Industries AI, not an accident. And so you've got this lattice AI thing that you can control a lot of things that will stop attacks.
Yep.
And will deter attacks to preserve peace and freedom. Tell us a little bit more about how Lattice works.
So Lattice is the AI engine that powers every single Anduril product. It is the common piece of software where every dollar I put into making Lattice AI better, I'm making all of my products better. And every dollar that I put into it gets multiplied, the effects across my dozens of products, rather than being tied into one piece of hardware. I'm a hardware guy at heart. But getting back to the Oculus, philosophy, you should only do things in hardware that need be done in hardware. Software can be manufactured infinitely for free. The replication cost is zero. And so upfront investment makes a lot of sense. When we started Anduril in 2017, AI was not cool. It was not hip. And it was not easy to raise money for. It was hard to raise money for a weapons company in general, but AI in particular, there was a lot of this sense that it was this fool's errand that was not actually going to pan out. But I was once again saying, what's the last step? I don't care what the next step in building new missiles or attack helicopters or ships is. Where's this all going in the end? And the answer was obviously huge numbers of systems, massive numbers of low-cost, attritable systems. And the only way to make that work is autonomy. We don't have an infinite supply of people to put in these things, nor should we want to put that many lives on the line. And so it was kind of a foregone conclusion. It wasn't that I wanted to start an AI company. It was that I had no choice. In order to work on the last step, now I had to start working on AI then. And of course, now it's the Palmer Luckey I Told You So tour. Everyone agrees that AI is important. Everyone agrees that it's going to work. And I say, yeah, I know. But I have some good dinners with my original investors. I say, hey, remember when you said that maybe AI was a dumb idea, even though you believed in the weapon stuff? Like, yeah, Palmer, we've heard this a lot of times now.
Yeah. So original investors had to, first of all, invest in you, but they also had to invest in your ability to overcome what was otherwise a fairly closed system of defense contractors.
Hugely insular.
The free enterprise was just not alive and well. Tell us a little bit about what that was and how you've been able to get through it, the cost plus manufacturing.
Well, if you want to read my full bit on this, you can go to rebootingthearsenal.com. I've written a huge manifesto about this, and in fact, there's an audio book version narrated by me. And so you could listen to that on your way home if you want, but here's the very short version. We've seen massive consolidation and massive distortion in the defense industry since the end of the Cold War. You have about 80% of the major weapons contracts going to just 5 companies. 30% of major weapons contracts have a single bidder, meaning only one company even shows up to even try to deliver. And that has led to gross inefficiencies, massive centralization, duplicating work that's been done 1,000 times before, and almost no examples of proactive investment on the part of the industry in order to try and do the right things. Most of these people are working on cost plus contracts where they get paid for time, materials, and then a fixed percentage of profit on top. That means that they make more money when things take longer. They make more money when the schedule slips. They make more money when the parts are more expensive. And so what can you expect in a system with those kinds of incentives? You can only expect what you incentivize. Longer schedules, more expensive systems that are more complicated and break more often, and zero investment of your own dollars into fixing the problems or building products from scratch. So I like to say that Anduril is a defense product company, not a defense contractor, because we work a lot like a lot of other technology companies do. We use our own money to decide what to build, how to build it, when it's done, and then we sell the product to our customer. And that's what we've done in many cases, building things that the government didn't believe were possible, never would have even been willing to try funding anyone else to build. And now we're defending bases all over the world, US bases, allied bases, building a lot of offensive and defensive weapon systems that are of critical importance.
So you went to Ukraine when the war broke out. Tell us why you decided to go in person and what you saw and how it affected you.
So I was a little bit of a late. I didn't go until a few months after the war started, so I missed the main offensive on Kyiv. But we've had people and weapons in Ukraine since the second week of the war. We moved pretty fast there. Look, there's a lot of angles that I could take with this. I've actually met Zelensky before the war started. Back in 2019, he read a article about us in Wired magazine and wanted to know if we could get him a lot of our border security technology to use on their eastern border. And unfortunately, the State Department wasn't really keen on Ukraine at that point in time. I think it could have made a material difference in the first few hours of the war. But
let me just interrupt for just a second. If Zelensky had Lattice, if he had, and it was known what he had, and had these, could that have prevented Russia from even going in?
No, I don't think. I think we could have made a material difference in the outcome, and I think that you might have seen this war. Look, if we were able to provide real-time intelligence with targeting-grade tracks of all of Russia's most critical weapon systems to Ukraine in those early days before their air force was eliminated, before their long-range precision fires were exhausted, I think that could have made a really big difference. But the war would have started for a lot of reasons. Remember, first of all, Putin hugely misestimated the outcome of this war. Whether you think he's smart or dumb for doing it, it isn't going the way that he thought. They really believed that this was going to be a 3 to 7 day special operation. They were going to go in, they were going to kick Ukraine's ass, they were going to take Kyiv, and it was all going to be over. And one of the reasons he was actually wrong is even just graphed within his own system. They had lots of missing night vision, missing tires, missing fuel reserves because it had all been sold out from under him, and then the paperwork falsified. He didn't even understand his own strength. And he also misunderstood where Ukraine was. But look, when I was, and I've heard people say, "Oh, that's just what what Putin says. He never really thought this was a 7-day war. That's just what he said to, get the populace on board. I think he truly believed it. One of the things that I saw when I was in Ukraine was some of these burned out vehicles and actually a crashed Ka-52 attack helicopter sitting on a runway that was shot down by the equivalent of a National Guardsman. They showed me the picture. He's wearing polo shirt and slacks, firing a missile at this helicopter landing on his company's property, and they blew it out of the sky. But one of the interesting things is whether they're talking about the armed crews in these armored vehicles or the attack helicopter pilots, most of them only had about 3 or 4 days of clothing and enough food for 3 or 4 days. They really thought they were going to go in, get this done, and they were going to get resupplied because they were going to have all the airports within a few days. In the Ka-52 helicopter, you know what the guy had in his bag? He had a couple days of clothes, a few days of food, and 50 condoms, because that's what he thought he was going to need in the wake of winning this conflict. He's not around anymore, but I mean, it's
optimistic guy there.
Look, but you got to remember that this is a pretty smart guy for the Russian armed forces. Like a Ka-52 helicopter, this is a post-Soviet system. So this is a stealth, all-composite attack helicopter, very, very advanced, developed after the fall of the Soviet Union. The people who fly it are actually pretty intelligent, but he had fallen for the propaganda that was so pervasive in Russian culture and in their state media. They had pushed this idea that the Ukrainians wanted the invasion, that they were controlled by the Jewish cabal, the West that actually secretly ruled through Zelensky, and that if only they would go in and decapitate the head of the Zionist beast, that all of the people of Ukraine would thank them. They thought there'd be parade. Like this guy, he brought a few days of normal clothes and then his really nice dress uniform. They thought they were going to be having parades. They thought the women were going to be all over them. They were going to say, "Thank you so much, Ka-52 pilot. You saved us from the Jews."
Well, this goes back to your point earlier about the effectiveness of propaganda and the willingness of the public to believe. And so you've got all of these additional products, but there's
it's the most valuable weapon that Russia had. I've always said it's not any one weapon system. It's the ability to control what even their intelligent populace believes, because that's how you get people who are otherwise intelligent to do things they would otherwise never do. It's actually, I think, China's most powerful weapon as well. When they invade Taiwan, they are not going to convince millions of people to die for that cause by telling them the truth. They're going to tell them some crazy version of, Taiwan is effectively ruled by the United States. It's a total proxy state. Your brothers and sisters want to be reunified with China. We want to achieve the heavenly mandate. Well, it'll be the first time China's been reunified as a whole in 3,000 years. And you're going to fight for the freedom of your brothers and sisters trapped under Western imperialist rule. And of course, they don't mention that Taiwan has much higher standard of living than China, that they have higher literacy, much higher earnings, much higher productivity, much better relations with the rest of the world, an extremely strong and flourishing democracy. They're going to lie to people to get them to do what they want, not tell them the truth. And then they're going to make a nice monument to the 2 or 3 million people who die in that amphibious assault and call them heroes. Wow. So unfortunately, these are things you can see coming from now. You don't have to wait for it to happen.